and it's still there. But
Right. Well, I guess we just jump right into it. I really don't have like much of a format in mind. I figured, this channel that I've been on, it's mostly just, well, in fact, it's all medical professionals that are trying to make that transition over. And some of them are in boot camps and some of them are not. And I'm getting pretty frequently people reaching out to me on LinkedIn from this channel asking questions about how I did it, what the process was like. So I figured, having someone like you who is completely self taught, um, and is in tech and has been in tech for quite a long time, that you might have some really nice insights to share. So maybe we can just start with who you are and what you're currently doing and how you kind of got into tech.
yeah, okay, that's a good start. I the hardest start for me, because of the struggle of talking about yourself. Um, yeah, so I'm Rory Duncan. If anyone wants to add me on LinkedIn, they can, just because I'll also answer your questions. Um, and I'm a software engineer for a Portland company, and I've been doing, we'll say, software engineering for about a decade now. I think I'm pushing 11 years. Um, and I definitely partially stumbled onto it accidentally, but as Jeremy mentioned, it is kind of a self-taught journey. There was a couple computer science classes along the way, but I don't think those were necessary. Um, yeah, good intro to me because there's I could talk for 45 minutes about some
Yeah.
of this stuff.
And we were really lucky, or I should say, I was really lucky because me and Roy, we obviously were friends going back a long time to like third or second grade. I forget now, but um, I was really fortunate in my transition because I had started to make this journey into tech, and Rory was also in the process of changing jobs too from one company to to the next. So I was really lucky in the respect that I had someone who was also trying to prep for
Yeah,
interviews at the same time.
yeah, different scales, but it
Yeah.
definitely translated really well, especially because we were both like doing the job hunt. I guess we should maybe for the sake of like podcast format keep first person of talking to each other. I realize I could talk third person to a audience, but I'm like that's actually weird mentally because I'm
Yeah.
like acknowledging a group. I'm gonna talk to you directly.
That's fine. Yeah, talk to me.
Yeah,
I will be your audience.
thank you. You're better than a hypothetical audience
Yeah.
'cause you have a face to me.
Yeah, so
um,
I guess a good question for everyone coming into this is everyone always wants to know, where do I start or how do I start? Um, and for someone like you who's had, about a decade of experience in this field, um, what would you say is like a good place for someone who's maybe just looking to get into switching over?
this is actually a great intro to even if they don't want to get into the field, which is I think everyone in a modern work environment could benefit from learning to code. I think it's a great auxiliary skill to nearly every job. At least if you're touching a computer, knowing how to code is so good. It's such a good auxiliary skill. Being able to potentially automate anything you find difficult, like that's its own journey in itself. But understanding how a computer works is um, a pretty important aspect with everyone's job and day actually interacting with them all the time. Um, and so that is also the intro of like you should learn how to code. You should. I don't even think there needs to be any more onus than just like learn how to write one code. You should be able to write like some code that does something. Maybe chase your own interest of like I don't know if you want to make a little console game, if you want to make a website, blah blah blah. There's a bunch of different avenues to start, and you could follow your own interests. But understanding a language, understanding how a computer works, and maybe, excuse me, Googling along the way how some of those questions arise naturally that you don't know of how a computer works is like the best intro because you need a stepping stone for all the technological things you'll learn along the way, and that's usually the best base.
Yeah, and I would say, just to kind of piggyback on that idea, to give some context of a real life or I guess a real life situation where I was applying principles of coding at like my physical therapy job. the clinic that I was working at, I mean, the people that started there were documenting since it was written documentations, and most of them didn't know and or weren't good with working with the computers and using the voice to text for documentation or using like macros in order to like pre-program a template and then just fill out the template with a patient. Um, one example, well, actually, there's a few, but there's two examples of applying principles of coding that I had when I started my career as a physical therapist. I at the first clinic was able to um, bring in some data driven decision making for our marketing. Because when I got there, they weren't actually following, who's sending us the patients, which hospitals, which surgeons, are these people off the street, what's their diagnosis, yeah. So these metrics around capturing, well, where should we spend our marketing money, right? Because our clinic was just going to each local hospital and talking and giving presentations to the surgeons, um, without actually knowing the referral source, like who is like the top. So what I did is I asked them for the data, and because our computers, the electronic medical record system that we had, captures all those details that just no one had ever looked at it before, and I was able to get it such that there was no HIPAA, um, like patient name, address, stuff like that. It was just what's the diagnosis and who's the surgeon that sent it, and then when was it sent. So then using that, I was able to take Python and programmatically go through and extract data that was meaningful. So we could start to narrow down, like, well, okay, this hospital gives us like, hundreds of referrals every year. So we definitely need to reach out to them. And then, very bottom, there's probably like one or two referrals from random surgeons from random hospitals. Those are probably just random people that just they called around and found a clinic. We took them. But then in between there was patients that were taking or getting, I should say, or we're getting 5 to 10. So that was like that mid tier. So we spent a lot of our time focusing on those mid tier clinics and hospitals to see if we could generate more um, referrals from them. So that's just an example of it's something that was easy for me to do because I had the data. But Rory's point of like where you should start, it should definitely be, I think, something that you're passionate about. And if you could link the two with work, then yeah, that's a great place to be.
Yeah, that was the transition I was going to make. Is you actually had a great opportunity to link it to work too,
Yeah,
because those opportunities will arise, and sometimes it's about recognizing them. Of like, hey, my company is doing this thing, and maybe that's a gap I could fill with technology, because that's really very big picture. That's what going into technology really looks like, is like how can you use technology to solve gaps in businesses, human problems, blah blah blah. It's all just a tool, right? A tool that has its own category of work, but that's where it all stems from.
yeah. And Rory, you have like a really interesting point that you make, which is being a technologist versus like a programmer. Can you kind of elaborate what that entails?
Yeah, and that ties perfectly into what I said, which I consider myself a technologist, and there's actually a longer trail, but I'll start with the what I mean by a technologist is I use technology to solve problems. It doesn't matter the stack or the technology, all of those I can learn along the way, um, because those again are all just tools. But there's also another aspect, which is like thinking about computers as part of that. I'm going to use tool a lot, I guess, in this conversation, but a tool in solving those problems. And I want to harness that to be able to do that because in the technology world, um, it actually evolves and changes and moves very quickly. And so if you narrow yourself into, say, I'm going to learn to program in this language, I'm going to learn to use this technology, you're potentially setting yourself up to become obsolete with that language, with that tool. It's like analogy of like I'm a power saw user only. I'm gonna go build buildings, and then you're suddenly your next job is on concrete or something. I mean, you'll get a bigger power saw. Don't analyze this
It's
analogy
okay.
too much, but it's that whole idea of like um, the analogy of like the different buildings are the different problems or companies you'll work for, and being able to apply yourself to those differently is the way to make yourself longitudinally um, we'll say, viable, applicable to many companies, many situations. And it's actually a modern, I think, a rising problem in technology right now that people are joining tech with a very narrow slice, which is a good starting spot. Um, but I fear like if the as technology tends to do, if it keeps evolving, they'll become obsolete over time. And generally, it's not a super fast cliff of like 1 year.
And then
You're
next,
using
yeah.
this technology, it's gone. But as an example, and I don't even know if the audience would be aware, but some people might have heard the term like WordPress developer. WordPress itself is very popular and used pretty heavily, but there's definitely a decline happening. And there's people who hedged a lot of their experience and technological skill on that specific technology. And you can kind of see that with some of like the React developer. There's people who consider themselves more React developers. And I mean, React itself is going, it's very strong-ish, but also has a little bit of a unfavorable decline that you can start to see right now. We'll see where that goes, of course, but
Right. And
those
it,
are
it
just tools for some people who aren't aware of all of those things. They're different
yeah,
slices of technology that may be elucidating my point that they do evolve and
it
rotate,
changes. And just to kind of
and
bring
they're
this,
all
sorry,
yeah.
go
Go
ahead.
ahead.
I was gonna say just to bring this full circle, one of the questions we asked at the beginning was, where should I start? Um, and I think the point that you're kind of making is it doesn't really necessarily matter where you start, just so long as you keep going, right? So as long as you keep expanding, you may start with React. I started with React. That's how
Mhm.
I did a lot of my development at the beginning, a lot of my projects. But now I'm working at a job that is all Python, and I haven't touched React in
Yeah.
since we were working together on it.
Yeah, and as this will maybe you would eventually get to this, but I've been on the side of hiring juniors and hiring a lot of different skill levels. And usually one of the things for juniors is like, have you actually worked with a programming language? Do you understand some programming fundamentals? And like you saying, I've worked with React. Well, A, that says you worked with two things, both React itself, which is a library, and JavaScript. How much you know either I could question or try to suss out in that interview, but it says, yeah, I've touched languages, I've used them, I can do something and something to show from it too, which maybe fits with just build something, learn a language, and try to make something come from it. Things to show from that result are really great. Just having, just saying, like, I wrote some code and then it not being that presentable, which is a pretty good segue into like utilizing things like GitHub to store your code so that it could be publicly viewed. And I'll say like that's kind of nerve wracking in itself because code can be very intellectual. It feels very intellectual because you're thinking through things, but everyone's bad at it at certain points. The perfect code generally means someone spent time on it. So like you don't waste your own time by trying to make it too pretty.
Right.
Make it functional first. There's actually those waves and revolutions with it of like make the code work. Now make it more like either modular or parameterized or all of these factors for making it nicer to work with. And some of that you don't have to do as a junior. So um
It's hard to always
oh
note too, like that those layers that you're bringing up. That's where it's really nice to have someone like Rory, or in my case, I have a senior software engineer at my company who it's the same thing. It's finish your project, get it working. In my case, I'm working on a project that's doing just tons of API calls and then modifying based off the result of those API calls, and then doing more API calls. And you feel like so satisfied and intellectually you own it's like your thought baby, and then someone's like,
mhm.
"Okay, cool, now change it," and it's like, "No, it's working though."
Yeah.
But it is good, like that whole process of going through and modularizing, or drive principles. You don't repeat yourself. Those are things that it requires a lot of I guess
Yeah.
going reiterating over the code. And the reason why I bring that up, and I think the reason why Roy's bringing that up too, is because coming into coding with no background, right? Like you've been in healthcare, you've done a lot of technology, or sorry, you've done a lot of healthcare. You haven't probably worked with technology at least at this capacity before. It might feel like you got it wrong, by not having the perfect thing the first time. And it's, I would say, something I struggled with was trying to get the right answer, right? Because that's in school what you're grinded on. You need to there is the optimal answer, there is the best thing, and you need to land on that the first time. But with coding, it's, it's more about, can you refactor it? Can you make this better? Small improvements are still improvements, and it doesn't necessarily mean that um, you didn't do it right. So
Yeah, and that ends up being a skill that if you do get into tech ends up being very good for like actually analyzing and recognizing how much time it actually takes because you could be like the face level someone asks you how long will it take to build this, you're like I could do the bare bones at like um whatever 12 hours, but then it's like well this is a business and our company's founded on this, we don't want the bare bones, how long will it actually take, and it gives you that slicing to be able to recognize the like the immediate functional result versus the scalable result versus the like we can actually sell this result, like there's those different slices to be able to analyze code and things you build with it.
and
You
that's
actually touched on a really good thing um, that I would say is the next step, or maybe even part of the first step, which is getting someone to be a mentor. I think in general, not even in tech, but in a lot of things, we overlook the idea of mentorship. Um, and I think the like pinnacle of learning comes from like dedicated effort, mentorship to guide you and save you time and all of that. And those coming together is like this optimal learning curve that you'll reach. And so I will be a big advocate of find a mentor. They don't even, this is the other thing, they don't even need to be an expert. They just need to be 8 months ahead of you. Not even that, maybe like 3 months ahead of you. They just need to have some answers that you don't have to be able to guide you. Of course, someone who has like longer term experience could maybe give you wider picture and longer term mentorship, but many mentors, of course, would help too.
yeah,
Or it will add to noise potentially, but
yeah, and this is, I think, a really good point, because this I can tell you personally with my experience. So I started to code around 2019, 2020 is like when I started taking it more seriously. And I made the decision that I wanted to switch careers from physical therapy to tech. And at the time, my wife was pregnant, and then we had our daughter. So my experience with coding was like a lot and then none, a lot and then none. Um,
Mhm.
the struggles of a new father, moving, starting a new job, all these things kind of get in the way. So I can say from my experience, um, my career switch, when it really like hit the gas pedal, was when I partnered with Rory and he started mentoring me. um, that's when it just threw the roof in terms of how fast I was going. Now, some of you might be doing a boot camp, which is awesome. You'll likely have exposure to that kind of built into the program. And I know some of you are thinking going the self taught route, which would be put the impetus on you to try to find that person. So I can't stress that point enough. Finding the mentor is huge. Um, so,
Yeah. It's actually, I would say the flaw in my self taught journey is I could have been uh, a lot more amplified in terms of how quickly I reached certain goals if I had a mentor. And I mean, that's actually when I stepped into your thing, your journey was you were dealing with there are so many directions I can take whatever I want to do in tech. And a mentor can help like well let's build the general skills to be able to go in any direction and then let's find the like niche that you want to do and what you actually need to learn, because if you looked at a graph of all of like technology it would look like a spider web and you're
yeah.
like
And
and
this
you're
is,
saying I can go any direction
it's
which
hard.
is true.
It's hard, someone coming into this, people ask, they say really general things like front end or back end, and even those are like, so once you like look
Yeah.
at what technologies you could use and where you could start, that's like, it's a huge wall to try to climb by yourself. So yeah, it's really nice, like Rory for example really helped whittle down, like, well, okay, what is it that you want to do? Okay, maybe we start here, and then maybe we don't worry about these other things. Just, and it's almost like the blinders on a horse, right? To keep him facing
Hmm.
forward. So the mentor thing will really help keep you kind of focused here, and it's also um what I think helped me a lot was the sense of accountability too, because it's like I got this guy like giving me advice, and I'm not gonna waste it. So I gotta do this. I can't just sit on my
Yeah,
hands, right?
if that's a form of motivation, yes, it's also helpful for that. I was also very lax. That was all in your own head. I'm like, whatever it takes to
Yeah,
do, do it.
yeah.
But yeah, I can understand that. I would probably be the same in that case. Um, that is, you touched on front end and back end, and those are usually the slices people hear about with technology, and they are the big slices. A lot of the jobs you see are in the what we'll call like web application space, where you have front end software engineering, which is like the UI and some other tendrils, and then you have back end, which is more like business logic and touching the beginnings of databases or potentially databases. And then you have database expertise, which is like someone who owns a database and knows how to scale them. And then there's a lot of other tendrils there. But that's what a lot of people hear about most. But it is still wider than that. Web applications are just the interface that's become very common for software engineering, but there is still a ton of things that are interfacing with like the hardware and tons of companies like Intel and HP that are interfacing with actual physical devices and startups that are building hardware around like Internet of Things. And so when presented, you'll hear a lot of noise around the web, but there is a ton more out there,
Yes.
including, and I haven't even touched on this, and I think it is a part of tech data and understanding and having a role related to data, because you see that role popping up a lot right now of like data specialist, which actually is slippery slope into like machine learning and all of that. So you can see how there's actually a very wide network of potential, and that also ties into a little bit of like there are people who are like, you'll find this in every career when you have a lot of people joining it who are like, oh no, there's too many people joining this whatever career path. There's going to be like no jobs or whatever. I don't think that's going to be the case with tech. We have a specialization thing happening, which is good for the result, and that's where people are coming in. So there's lots of specializations for you to try to find your path into, which might sound contradictory to what I said earlier about the like don't become a specialist in this tool. But um, by a specialization, I mean like say you did become a front end engineer, you would be very good at thinking about UIs and the experience that you provide and the code that helps build those. But you wouldn't necessarily be tied to like I'm the React developer. I only build UIs because that's the tool I use.
That makes sense. Yeah, because
Um,
you could accomplish the same, for example, one of the things that you were looking at was Svelte, or Angular or React for a company. And
mhm.
so those are all, again, just kind of tools to accomplish the same thing, which is the front end. So you could be a front end specialist and determine based on like the company's needs, you could help to determine which tool to use. So you
Yep.
specialize, but not specialize in the sense of the tool, but more so the outcome.
Yeah. And part of that technologist kind of role is being able to be like, we use this tool. This tool might be better, and like that's a very useful business feedback to be able to give because then you can like compare and contrast those tools, all of that, which is a thing that happens a lot for many people in tech. Is like compare these tools, figure out which is better, which suits this business better, because that's beginning of tangent. I React is like used a lot, but it maybe isn't the best tool for most companies, but it's prolific.
Right.
Mm.
We can I want to dive into that, but I also want to circle back real quick and just kind of talk about what you were saying with the front end versus the back end, and those are kind of big terms that
Mhm.
people throw around. Um and so when I first started before I landed my job, I would have said I was probably more of a front end person because I was training in React and we also started using Svelte, which if you haven't heard of that, you should go check it out. It's actually a really cool language or framework. I forget what it is.
But your company is,
Oh no,
or
no, when we first started working together,
oh,
we were
okay, yeah.
working with React, and so I would have considered myself like a front end person, and I got this job, and we don't even touch anything front end. So
Yeah.
to your point about companies tend to have just a lot more of a net than what you're typically exposed to on the front. Like what I'm dealing with right now, I'm not even sure that it's DevOpsy, site reliability, software engineering. It's like an amalgamation of a lot of different roles. We're like the team that takes care of other teams. That's what our stuff is. We have like terabytes, multiple terabytes of data running through our application a day, like we're collecting from everyone. Um,
Mhm.
and part of that information that's coming in is also, is the program running on a computer, and what's the computer's like CPU cycles, how much storage is left on the computer. Is it a virtual machine or is it physical? If it is, virtual, like how many other machines are on that virtual machine? So it's like it
Hmm.
it deals with so much more than what would be, I would say, like front end or back end, right? Like the stuff that I'm working with right now is just it's like everything from like the actual hardware to um errors coming in from the front end or errors coming in from the back end. So um
Yeah.
just keep that in mind, I suppose, when you're doing all this training. And that's why I think, to Rory's point about being a generalist or being a technologist, is that once you learn these principles, it kind of works everywhere.
Yeah. Your
So
position is actually great for that because you're touching on that DevOps side, which a lot of, I'd say, now juniors don't touch on very much. And so you're getting this whole skill that has become more and more of its own position, the DevOps position. And whether that's the direction you want to go in your life is up to you, but it's available now through that position. But you're also getting I say access, um, exposure to
exposure.
being able to
Yeah.
write code, yeah, and all of that, which is actually a great, I think, a pinnacle point of like starting the journey is your junior position. And I know a lot of people will will if they're potentially drawn to tech because of the pay, will be like, I'm going to try to be a junior at like Google or any of the FANG or whatever. But I personal opinion, I think people will learn the most in the smaller companies. Uh, Not that Jeremy's company is necessarily the smallest, but one where there's the space to kind of wear those different hats, will give you the most exposure, and the exposure will help you maybe decide the direction you want to take in that spider web of potential roles.
Yeah.
Um,
I think this is kind of lending really well into, I think, a topic that a lot of people are really interested in is, one we're kind of been touching on and talking about is, well, where and how do I get started? And then the next thing is like, well, once I'm started, like when do I start applying, or how do I start applying, or what should I look for?
mhm.
So from your experience being on the other end of the table, being someone who's hired juniors, what are some of the key things that someone who's starting their career in tech right now and who's learning, let's say maybe they're halfway through their boot camp, just what should they keep in mind when they come to that table to have a discussion about doing an interview?
Yeah, that's that's actually a great middle step that we almost missed, which is like, okay, the person doing the boot camp will probably be ahead in this curve. But say you're teaching yourself how to code, you have taught yourself a language, maybe you've been interested in taught yourself to. The next step, and I'd say do this before even maybe even building anything, is try to find some junior level position job postings, and this is applied outside of technology too. Know what people are asking for and looking for, and try to get a grok of like, okay, they want, ignore the things about years of experience. That's always garbage. But
Yeah.
like, um, maybe all they want is say proof that you've touched certain technology, like little experience with whatever these technologies are. And that those don't have to be the technology you have. I'd say look at a wide range to just get the gist of what they're all asking for. And then start figuring that's your goal line. Like if they say have touched three pieces of technology, do that. Like learn three languages. And then the next part, I would say this is the bottom threshold for maybe applying for a junior position, is to have built one or two projects of like, the scale is hard to say, but we'll say like they took you at least a week or two that you could show and talk about, because it's hard to um, say exactly what a single company is looking for. But if I ran across a junior who at least had something to show, had touch technology, that's enough to be like, I could teach this person more. The organization that I'm working for might have different thresholds that potentially might be the like, we can't hire this person, and that would be organizational specific, of like they need to have touched very specific technology. But I would give that feedback in the interview, which could be a like, okay, go learn this and in 3 months re-interview type of thing. Um, but that boundaries of like, this is the bare minimum for being able to come to a junior interview position, or like interview junior
Level
software
interview.
engineer interview. Yeah, I think is the good starting point because you can get a lot of like foot in the door positions just from being able to have that little bare minimum. And of course, there's more to do after that, but I would say that's like the very bottom. I don't think you should treat that as the bottom goalpost. I think you should like, well, explore your interests, build things that are meaningful to you that you could talk about meaningfully. But I would say, like, as someone on the other side of the table, those would be the bare minimum that I'm looking for personally. Again,
Right.
it's hard to like to give you context. When interviewing for juniors, there's usually a criteria, um, and that'll be organizational specific of like what are they looking for, what holes are they trying to fill. Sometimes it's more or less, and that'll just depend. There's I can't really train someone towards that because someone decided kind of arbitrarily like we need a junior who's built 5 projects and knows what I don't know certain
Technology is, or
terminology or yeah, and yeah, and I would say don't aim for Fang as a starter.
yeah,
You can try, but that's a different path in itself. And I actually think there's books and classes on how to get into Fang,
right.
and that's why Fang's contentious to start with. So
And I think the key pieces here that Rory's kind of hitting on, to kind of reiterate action items, is that it sounds like you apply before you think you should. That's
mhm.
one of the big ones. Is that was something I personally struggled with. Here's the thing: you're never gonna feel ready. You're never gonna feel good enough. Um, but that's the point, is that you're always trying to put yourself in deeper water, as you're learning to swim, right? So just apply before you think you're ready. The other big thing too is go and look at the job postings. So if you're someone, let's say you want to work local, you don't want to be remote, you're going to need to see like, well, in my area, what is it that they're actually asking for? It could be that they're
Mhm.
only looking for SQL um, specialists, right? And it's like, okay, well, I guess I just have to learn that if I'm going to be working locally. If you're going remote, obviously it's a completely different story. You have a lot more options.
Yeah, the local this is actually a great point you're making because I think where you were at React development was actually huge. So knowing React is a big facet
Yeah, it was
for your
helpful.
locality.
Um, Yeah, and then I think too, another point, now that there are a lot of this is just, I'm kind of derailing myself a little bit, but I think this is a something interesting to bring up, is that there are a lot of companies that are still remote, and there's a large push for companies to go back to in office, and a lot of workers don't want to go back to the office. So if you're looking for where you have an advantage, if your company is local and they're only hiring local, that means that the pool of applicants from which they can pull from dwindles a lot. If you're looking at remote jobs, it's the entire United States, sometimes even across the seas. So your competition is very large. So if you apply local, to get your foot in the door at a company, start there, and then you know make your career what it is you want to make it from there on. But that's just like a sidebar. So apply before you think you should apply. Consider what they're actually looking for, if you're looking remote or if you're looking local. What skills do they want you to have? 100% ignore the experience. The job I have right now wanted 5 years of experience, and um, yeah, I definitely don't have that. So
Yeah. To this is maybe an implicit of what I was talking about. When I look at hiring juniors, and a company will look at it this way: you're an investment, and so we just want to see that you're someone that can learn, or who has taught themselves, or can learn. And so really, all it has to be is that bare minimum again. And then the other half is a like culture fit that most companies will do, which is like you don't seem like the person who started learning something, rage quit, and like now you decided to take up carpentry or something like that. Like they
right,
don't want to see like anti workplace habits or anything like that. Um, yeah, the I'll cede a little to what you responded. When I was a junior, um, this was like I'm trying to even date myself. When what year would this have been? I would say this was like 2015-ish or something. Maybe not even that. Maybe earlier. I don't remember. But remote work wasn't big, and I remembered struggling with that. Like locally, there were only these companies, and I would remember trying to seek those remote positions, and it just being like not very fruitful. And so I have that maybe bias of like as a junior, it's very hard to get a remote first position. I don't know about in the current landscape, but I would still maybe push someone to like look at companies in your area for that getting the junior or intern developer position first. And once you become mid to senior, like after that point, it's a lot easier. But you have to be dealing with a company who's already dealt with a junior or they're prepared to take this on, but juniors require that investment and that time investment. And so to do that remotely is a little more difficult, especially if sometimes juniors don't know the like workplace habits of engineering and like how to actually use their time efficiently. Hopefully people handle that, but I imagine people coming from healthcare are pretty good at that. But a lot of people who are looking at juniors are also looking at people who are straight out of college who don't know the workplace. And so sometimes they want them to be in person and like, here's some rails um,
Right.
and all of that. So that's maybe just nuance slash caveats. It might not actually like apply to everyone's situation, but figure it's worth saying like local is a better start in my opinion.
Yeah. Well, I can't disagree, right? So
Yeah. Your company is local to
yeah, it's
where
like
you
a
live? Oh,
30
okay.
30 minute drive. So I was doing home health physical therapy, so driving for 30 minutes a day, or I guess the hour in total is that's fine by me. I was doing like
Yeah.
150 miles a day before that, so hour drive
Yeah.
a day is perfect.
I don't know your audience specifically, but this is the downside of most tech, which is it is urban bound. You are probably going to need to be near a city until you reach a certain skill threshold in which you're like mid to senior level, where you're confident you could get a job across things, across state boundaries and stuff. But otherwise, there is a maybe locality restraint too. And this would exist with any job, really. The
Right.
tech just happens to be with computers, so you have a little more leeway, but there's that. There is a career path that actually I'll save this for the end because it is slightly tangential. Because let's continue building out the like what are the steps to get into tech, which was, as we said, um, learn to code, start looking at maybe applying for junior positions. Projects is now the third thing, which I mentioned, like do some to be presentable,
Oh, yes.
but projects themselves are the like let's switch from code really fast. Let's talk about arts based or trades based things. Um, and this is actually what coined, or I say coined, flavored my experience with being self taught. Is I did graphic design before this, and with graphic design, it doesn't even really matter if you've gone to school. What matters is that you have a presentable portfolio. And so I was very privy to the idea of portfolios, being able to showcase what you can do. And projects are kind of fitting into that same thing. That's why you don't need a comp sci degree because you could have things that are presentable to say, like, I've built this, I understood it, blah, blah, blah. Comp sci in itself is its own conversation. But so projects are that portfolio piece, if you will, that when you walk into an interview, you're like, I've built this many things. Because that's really what a resume is, right? Like, except for it's about the workplace instead of the portfolio items itself. They're just assuming because you worked here, there were things you worked on. Um, yes. So projects can be that great presentational. I understand code. I can build things because in the end, that's what you're going to be doing, right? For work, you will be hopefully doing that same thing, building things,
Yeah.
presenting items.
And
And so in that way, it shows like you're capable of doing the work.
yeah, and Rory had said something earlier too that I wanted to circle back on, which was doing a project, and he had said like the size of the project is hard to say depending on what it is that you're doing, but he used the term 1 to 2 weeks of working on something, and I'm guessing that's probably 1 to 2 weeks of 8 hours a day grinding away at a project, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
for those who are still working jobs, just take whatever time that you're applying towards coding, right? So let's say you take on a project and you have 2 hours at the end of the night, and you have 4 hours in the weekend to dedicate that. So 2 weeks of 8 hour days is 40 hours, if you're doing like a standard 9 to 5. So however long that takes you to kind of meet that requirement in your 2 hours plus the 4 hours in the weekend, right? Um, so think about it in those terms. And now that's obviously like a really huge generalization. Like my projects, I
Yeah.
think took like 3 months, but it's
It's
just
also a hard thing to ask of people. I've had my own side projects in like game development, and being like, okay, now go spend your evenings or your weekends doing code is really difficult.
yeah,
So I would say before you even start a project, think about what you're trying to achieve and try to think about what is the scalable, what is the achievable part of that, and
yeah,
like make that the stepping stone. Because if you give yourself too large of a project, like burnout while learning is just as real.
yeah.
So it
And
has to
that's
be achievable.
happened to me so many times because I would start, get burned out, and then crash. Start, burned out, get and crash. So another thing that I think kind of piggybacking on what Rory's talking about right now is that appropriate bite-sized piece. Breaking out a project into something that's a little more something that you can stand to do for a long period of time because you're going to be doing it a
Mhm.
lot and you're gonna get frustrated. Things are going to break and it's not going to work. Those are like hands down what's going to happen. What I found to be really helpful for me, which might be a hot take compared to like what other people might tell you online, is if you're finding yourself getting frustrated working on one project, just switch and do something else. Maybe you go work on data structures and algorithms for a little bit. Maybe that's more easy to digest at this time, right? Work on
Yeah,
how do I do a um, depth first search? How do I do a breadth first search? Just watch some
yeah,
videos on that. I mean, if you're doing something that's related to this whole field, it's not like you're at a loss. The thing that you like Rory's mentioned or hitting on is that if you're finding yourself burnt out, then it's like you're not going to do anything. So um,
yeah,
healthcare, we're really good at trying to motivate people, but we're not always the best at motivating ourselves. And I think that's probably true of everyone. So just keep those concepts, the same things that you do with your patients to motivate, same thing you're gonna have to do with yourself to motivate. Um,
yeah. You mentioned the frustration, and this is where I step in as a motivator mentor. I talked about that optimal learning curve, which is like if you're just grinding and that you're learning so hard that you're actually getting frustrated, like you're reaching a asymptotically the end of being productive. Um, because I think the advice I would give Jeremy directly is like give this a go. Like throw yourself at it. As soon as you feel yourself like slowed down, blocked, or whatever, then reach out for questions because it's like this whole. If you see this linear graph, learning, learning, learning. Oh, this is really hard. I'm not as productive. I step in and boop and set you back on the course of like, okay, be productive again. And
yeah,
that's how you reach that productivity of still learning at a good rate.
yeah,
Because those things will happen, and that's actually one of the more valuable things of a mentor. And that's why I said they just have to be a little ahead of you. They just have to know a couple of the answers that you don't to be able to realign you.
yes, and that's perfect. There's actually, I'm sure you guys have, if you guys have been doing any research in this field, there's a book called Deep Work. I believe it's called Deep Work, and it's meant for people who are doing software engineering. And the whole, without being too general about the book, the whole concept is that you only have so much brain power you can put forward in a day. And it's key. The author is making the argument that even someone who's like really good at putting full effort in um, and has trained their brain to be high concentration, maybe 4 hours a day.
Hmm.
People like myself, like I would say that I'm as a physical therapist on the other end of the spectrum because I got, I see a patient, we're talking for 10 minutes, we're doing exercises, I'm documenting next patient. So my everything's chunked. I got like an attention span that's like maybe 10 to 15 minute slices, right?
Hmm.
So having to sit down for 4 hours or in my case, like an 8 hour day and code for the entire 8 hours, that's almost impossible. So um, if you're working and you're working on a project and you maybe get like 30, 40, 50 minutes in, it's okay to like stop and refresh because it might just be you're training that muscle of your brain to be able to focus for that long. And like Rory was saying, having a
Yeah,
mentor to kind of help um, get you back in line is really helpful.
this that ties into why tech is so appealing as a career. In it, a lot of it boils down to that somewhere along the way, people realized you can only be productive when writing or doing intellectual things, really like for a focus based thing, 4 hours of a day. And you'll still have an 8 hour workday. Many companies, and this is variable depending on the company, but they really expect engineers to be essentially productive 6 hours a day. This is kind of hand wavy, but there's just kind of this known onus. There's a like, you're not going to just be sitting and writing code 8 hours a day. If you did,
There's a
bad things will
the
happen. There's a
quality of
lot
your
of
code
paths. Yeah,
the quality of your code just crashes after, like,
yeah,
in my
and
opinion,
then
4 hours.
yeah, and tie in that work is more than just that. You're not just it's not assembly line necessarily that you write code and then next thing slides across. There's like context shifts and all of that.
Yeah,
But that's where the work life balance of a lot of this comes through is the understanding that you can only do so much in a day and you can only think deeply about things so much in a day. And a lot of this does require that thinking deeply. Um, so applying that to your own learning too, like don't try to grind necessarily.
yeah. I think that, um yeah, it was something I wish I would've learned earlier on, or had some I wish I would've spoken to Rory about this sooner, because that was something I was really struggling with. I could do, like a crazy person, like, for a week of, like, 5 hours a day, but then, like, the next week, I'd be like, "I'm not gonna touch it."
Yeah. Which yeah, we learn about those secret forms of burnout
Yeah.
kind of after the fact. I feel
Alright,
like bodybuilding's taught me that part,
yeah.
but for like or gymming, I guess, of like the burnout comes in little secret ways that you don't realize anymore. It's not just like sudden depression type of burnout. It's like lack of motivation dropping over the course of time and things like that.
Yeah.
Because I would do the same thing. I would say like if you feel like you can do 6 hours and you can do it consistently, do it. Like ride your energy,
Yeah,
but be aware of what your energy level is. And I mean, it's this is branching into like know thyself and your own mental health and what you're
right.
capable and have energy for and what your life demands and all of that.
I think though this is really important to bring up though, because when I first started, there is like this I have to get this done mentality, especially if you're someone like me who doesn't like what they're doing. You're in this healthcare career, and you want to switch over, and it's like every hour you're not spent working on this, you're wasting your time. That's kind of how I felt.
Mhm.
And I think there is a lot of negative mental health consequences that comes with that kind of framing. So just being aware of how it's all done.
Yeah, um, that's actually why that learning to program and then doing a project or two is actually a good self-cooling mechanism because you could write and learn to code. You could work on that project and be like, "Wow, this is not the like the this is not what I want to do." And that's a great thing to learn there at
Yeah.
that step rather than the I don't know, your first job where suddenly you switched careers and maybe that's an opportunity cost. Like you could have just spent that time further into your current career and now you just like took a huge step back to rotate to a different career.
Right.
And, being able to do those little cooling moments earlier are better for your time and mental health because I can only imagine re-rotating is another form of like taking energy away.
Yeah.
That sounds like really frustrating situation to be in. So um, yeah, I had another thought along that lines. But oh, that it's not always about code. This is the perfect time to bring it up because here's a path that this is tangential for sure. Well, tangential to our original premise of like go learn to code to get into tech. Um, that's not the only way to get into tech. And I've known many people who work for tech companies who do this, which is a lot of companies need a lot of tech companies are kind of built on this backbone of like there are usually people who work in say onboarding or customer service or some type of data processor or data entry position and those are also really good entrances to tech companies especially the data entry or processing person because the data part's important because through that position, you're hands on entering data and you start to understand the data of a business. And most businesses are just data. They're little bits of information that go through certain pipelines and there's some outcome. Um, there's a little comp sci overview of how that is the case. But so understanding that data is actually this way to amplify yourself within that company. Because if you understand the data, in a way, you understand the business. And I've witnessed people who have started in that data entry position who are now things like product and project managers and on their way to being able to be like really sea level at that. Sounds funny to say sea level because I think of the ocean, but chief level, chief executive officer will say, but that type of C level in a company because they understand the business so well. In going through that path upward through the company and getting to like a product manager, that's when the skills become very translatable because a product or project manager in one company, a lot of the duties and responsibilities do actually map over. And like product and project managers are very necessary. They interface with engineers and stakeholders and all of that. And it's a position in tech with a lot of different, we'll say, tendrils in terms of what you can do. And so that actually might be a position that applies to certain personalities more too than the learn to code path. And I think it's a very valid one that's maybe not, I don't even think like you can't go to school necessarily to be a product or project manager.
Yeah.
So there's almost like a gap in terms of like there are all these what I'd call almost glue positions of like keeping a organization together
Yeah.
that they kind of just hire like someone who has the aptitude, someone who knows things and can get things done is
Yeah.
enough to get into those tech holes, we'll say.
Yeah. And I'd say
And that is a path.
to kind of allow or to piggyback on that concept too, there is like a stereotype I'd say with people who code and software engineers and their ability to communicate. Um, and we all know that stereotypes are not necessarily true, but there is something to be said about that because there are some people I think that aren't as good at communicating, and people in healthcare, particularly physical therapists or anyone who's worked with a patient, knows that
Mhm,
communication is very important, right? How you say it, when you say it. These are all things that we a skill set really that we've refined and we use often. That transfers well to almost any career. And kind of what Roy's talking about now is like essentially that same skill set. Being able to take what everyone is working on, articulate that in a way that makes sense to a stakeholder. And so
mhm.
he's right. Yeah, there's not. If you understand what the software engineer is doing, you don't necessarily have to code it yourself, but you get the concept of like, yeah, they're working on this project. This is the technology that they're using. This is the timeline. These are the holdups that they're having, and these are why they're having the holdups. And being able to articulate that to a stakeholder, that's a really good skill to have. So, anyways,
Yeah.
we kind
There
of
is the caveat of those positions, you're not going to always reach the engineer level of salary. But if your goal is to get to a better work life balance or work position, and maybe one that aligns to your aptitude more than code, that is an available thing. That to say, there are product and project managers that make engineer salary and stuff. Like
yeah,
they are, I think, a very vital part for most, and usually the backbone of a lot of engineering teams. So,
yeah.
um,
Our manager, it's awesome because we have all these higher ups that are just like launching things at us, the like wants really, and then our manager just kind of like intercepts all of that so that we can do our jobs and not have to deal with that all the time. So
the meme of the person with the
yeah,
catching flaming arrows.
that's right.
Yeah,
That's exactly who that for our team. That's exactly who that is.
and there's potential for someone to be a product manager, project manager, and embellish their technological skill too. Like still continue, or maybe continue to learn more technological things like programming. Though at that point, you might have exposure to actual engineers to teach you. I know for some reason, the product manager that I work with, we are hazing constantly of like, come join this call and watch us write some SQL and like there's a little bit of that of like we're embellishing their skill level because a lot of people are maybe interested and I think there's a lot of value in product managers also having a little semblance of technological skill. So I
Yeah,
mean, I think that's the path of engineers into leadership is essentially like they know the technological half now learn the communication half. It's just a reversal with product managers learning technological skills.
right. Um, okay, so we've covered a lot of good stuff. How to get in, what to focus on, the application and the projects. We went on a tangent a little bit about different career paths, but I think starting out, this is a pretty good. I'd say like a pretty good foundation to work on. Now, of course, there are so many resources, and the Discord channel has just tons of resources. Everyone in there is very active, and they've done a good job, I think, at collaborating and collecting all that information. And
The
this
great curation problem.
Yeah, and then this video is just another one of those resources. What we said
Mhm.
in this video might not click for anyone, and maybe it'll click for one person. If it does, then that's really all that matters, right? So, um, I like to put myself out there as a resource. I know some of you have been reaching out to me on LinkedIn, and just keep doing that. I'll always reply. I might not be the fastest at replying, but I'll always reply and try to, distill everything that I know down into something that's actionable.
Mhm.
And I think Rory too. Are you okay with being referenced in there, or
Yeah, yeah, that's fine with me. I mean, I also have time allotment limit, but I don't think I'm near it yet. So,
yeah?
um,
So if you have questions, reach out to either of us. We're both happy to um, shoot you back an email and just kind of talk through maybe more things that we talked about in this video, or if you have questions about things we didn't bring up in this video, or if you want to have like us answer a specific topic like Python versus JavaScript, things like that. Don't worry about reaching out to us. Consider us a resource, and then we'll yeah, we'll try to be our best at being helpful. Do you have any closing thoughts?
not necessarily. I didn't prepare a speech. But I would say there's kind of like a good luck type of statement that needs to be said because this isn't easy.
It's not.
And I feel for anyone who has to do like career or any occupational shift in that way
Yeah.
because it's not a simple thing.
Yes, and take me as an example. The light gets better at the end. All right, just stick through with it,
Yeah.
and
Though we don't want to color too much with survivorship bias too. That's what I was saying. Find out if a lot of these paths work for you early
yeah,
because know thyself and all that.
exactly. All right,
Do yoga.
do some yoga. All right, take care, everyone.